Welcome back to another video. In this video, we'll take a look at identity operators, and what identity operators do, they look at two objects and check whether they are the same objects or not. And this is not looking at if two values are equal, but if two items are in fact the same item, or technically, should I say, they are of the same data type and they share the same memory location. When dealing with identity operators, there are two operators in particular. One is the is operator and the other one is the is not operator. The is operator returns true if both variables are the same object, otherwise it will return a false. And the is not operator returns true if both variables are not the same object, otherwise it will return false. So it does the opposite. So some of the use cases for identity operators are preventing object duplication in data structures, checking whether a variable is none. This is quite a common one and we will have a look at this shortly. Avoiding accidental aliasing in mutable objects. So this checks if two variables reference the same object in memory to avoid accidental modifications through aliasing. And checking caching behavior in immutable objects like integers. So let's have a look at the use cases in a bit more depth before we have a look at them in PyCharm. So checking whether a variable is none. I've started with this one and I've got two examples of this in PyCharm. So one of the most common use cases is checking whether a variable is none. So the is operator is typically used for this, as it checks if the variable points to the none object. And a none object is a special constant in Python used to indicate the absence of a value. Now looking at some code, x equals none. If x is none, print x is none, and then the output is x is none. This is a very simple example, but I'm going to show a use case in PyCharm next. When checking for none, using is, or that should say using the is operator, is the preferred choice because there's only one instance of the none in memory and you're explicitly checking for it, so that's why it's used. Now this is use case number 2 for checking for the none object, and I'll show an example of this in PyCharm. But when writing functions, you often want to see if an optional argument was passed. If the argument was not passed, its default value will be none. And you can check for that using the is operator. So I'll be showing an example of this very shortly. Another use case, avoiding accidental aliasing in lists or mutable objects. So when we deal with mutable objects like lists or dictionaries, you want to check if two variables reference the same object in memory to avoid accidental modification through aliasing. So the code A equals in a list 1 2, B equals in a list 1 2, and then C equals A. And then we can print C is A and see if that's true or false. In this case, it's true. And another very simple and very similar example is checking caching behavior in immutable objects like integers. So the code A equals 7, B equals 7, print A is B, and check the output whether it's true or false. In this case, it's true. And another example is preventing object duplication in data structures. So when working with objects like dictionaries or sets, you may want to ensure that an object is not duplicated by checking its object identity. So we've got object 1 equals key value, and then object 2 equals object 1. If object 1 is object 2, print these two objects are identical and will not be duplicated, and the output is these two objects are identical and will not be duplicated. Now let's have a look at some of these examples in PyCharm. The first thing I'm going to do is print out 3 list objects, and next I'm going to say D equals A. So I've got A, which has a value of 1 and 2. And then I've got B, which has 2 items, so 1 and 2 again. So these are exactly the same. And then I have got C, which has a value of 2 and 3. And as we can see, these are different from these two here. And so over here, I have used the assignment operator to assign D to A. Now let's have a look at how the identity operator works. If I do a print, brackets, and then if I do a D, and let's use the identity operator, which will be is, and let's do a verification to check if D is actually A. So let's run this, and we can see we get A true, a Boolean result of true back, which makes sense because I have declared it over here, D equals A. So this returns true because they are in fact the same object. Now let's check if D equals B. Since A has the same value as B, so they both hold the same values. So let's verify if D equals B as well. So let's do a D is B, and let's run the file, and this time it returns a false. So although D equals A, and A has the same value items as B, D is not B. It's not the same thing. Or just for completeness, what we can do is copy this and do a A equals B instead. or A is B should I say, just to verify they are in fact not the same object, and we get a false. Now if I did a D equals B or even a equals B, let's see what we get instead. So this time we're using the comparison operator. I'll change both of these to a double equal to use the comparison operator and remove the ones above so we don't get confused with the results, and let's run the file. And as we can see, this time it's true for both of them because they hold the same values, A and B. So A and C should not be the same because they hold different values. Let's try A and C. So the third one should come back as false. I've missed out the parenthesis. Let me put that in and let's run the file again. And there we go, we get a false. So let's print out the very first one again. D is A. And let's use the is not operator this time. And the is not operator does the opposite. So usually this would be true, but this time it will be a false. Let's print a duplicate of it instead. So we've got both results, and let's run the file. So the first one is true because D and A are the same objects, and the second one is false because it does the opposite, and so it's reversed the Boolean output. Just to finish off the video, I've got some more examples to show in PyCharm. So the very top one we have already had a look at, shows the use case of avoiding accidental aliasing in lists or mutable objects, and the second one is preventing object duplication in data structures. Again, we had a look at this on the PowerPoint slide, and the last two is the two I wanted to focus on. So these two here, and these two is checking for the non-object, which is used to indicate the absence of a value. So x equals none, none means that x has no value or is explicitly empty. And the is operator checks if x and none are the same object, and because they are, it will print x is none. We can see already the results on the right hand side. So these are the results, by the way. This is for the first one, true. And then the second one, these two objects are identical and will not be duplicated. And the third one is x is none for this one over here. But the very last one is a common use case. So when writing functions, you often want to see if an optional argument was passed. And if the argument was not passed, its default value will often be none. And you can check for this using the is operator. So we have it here. We are checking if a name has been passed. And if the name is none, which we can see here, if name is none, we are returning hello person. Else we are returning hello and the person's name. And then here we are printing the function without passing a name. And on the second line, we are printing the function greet again, but this time we are passing the name Jack. And that's why the result is hello person, because we are not passing a name. And the second line, we print hello Jack. But the whole point is we use the is operator to check the value of the non-type object. And that's it for this video. That's a quick overview of identity operators.